Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Before we get into everything, please make sure to like, leave a comment down below, and also subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate if you could hit that big red button down below and come along for the journey. We are just about to, or I believe we did cross the 870 subscriber threshold, so that is amazing. I don't know how we reached that kind of milestone so quickly, so thank you to everyone that's done that so far. Also, turn on post notifications. You could stay up to date and in the know with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates. All right, now that we got all that out of the way, this Giannis news that I am going to be talking about, it's not positive, and it's that he did in fact sustain a pretty minor knee injury during Eurobasket, and while this is something that a lot of Bucks fans and fans of superstar players that are competing in Eurobasket, like Lakers fans are for Luka Doncic and Nuggets fans for Nikola Jokic and Jazz fans for Larry Markkinen, and even going on and on, that when a player sustains an injury during something like Eurobasket, there's going to be the school of NBA fans or Bucks fans, especially for this case, that are going to say, just shut Giannis down for the rest of this, for the rest of Eurobasket, for the rest of the tournament. We cannot possibly risk Giannis going out there and aggravating this knee injury and or furthering this injury in any kind of capacity because we need him out there for the 2025-26 season in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey. But from Giannis's perspective, and for basically anybody that's in his shoes as a top 3 to 5 player in the NBA that's competing in Eurobasket again alongside Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic, those guys don't not want to play in Eurobasket. That's something that they're obviously looking forward to, representing their country and going out there and putting everything on the line in a tournament to again compete for a title for their home country. That's a very unique experience that Americans or fans of the NBA in general aren't really going to appreciate. That Giannis wants to compete with Greece across his chest just as much as he does Milwaukee. So in this way, I don't really have anything to say to be like, oh, Giannis has to be shut down for the rest of Eurobasket. It seems as though he's going to continue playing, and we actually got an update from, hope I'm not butchering the name, but Harris Stavro, and he basically said that Giannis is going to play in, I guess, Greece's upcoming match against Spain, and I don't have a problem with it because again, from all the reports that we've seen, this injury doesn't seem to be too major and it's something that's kind of going to be breezed past. So as long as it's not something that's too concerning, I'm not going to be too concerned. As long as Giannis feels fine, I'm not going to be too concerned regarding his injury status or whether he decides that he's able to or not able to play in a Eurobasket competition because again, it's something completely different that we need to understand, that Giannis is waiting for this, or he's been waiting for this opportunity to compete with Greece across his chest again. And, it's you just got to let him do him in this instance, even though there is obviously so much riding on his health going into this season, like an incredibly huge number of things going, riding on his health. Okay. Moving forward, we're going to talk about Ajax for a little bit because Andre Jackson Jr., he may be the guy that ends up getting released, or not released by the Milwaukee Bucks, but extradited to another team in some way, shape, or form. The Milwaukee Bucks are going to need to make a couple of decisions very, very, in the near future to cut down their roster size because they're at, I believe, 17 players, and of course they need the 15 to go into the regular season with, and that's excluding guys that are in the G League or on two ways with the Wisconsin Herd, like guys like Mark Sears, who we're going to get into in the next segment, and Jamari Bouye and Pete Nance, and so that's a different thing. But basically, Andre Jackson Jr. could potentially be a target for the Boston Celtics? Question mark. And this comes from Fansided's Jack Simone. This little update, this little hypothetical, and it's basically talking about what kind of team that Andre Jackson Jr. could potentially go to, or which team would like to acquire his services. And the Boston Celtics, it's not really a bad theory that Boston could be interested in a guy like Ajax just simply because of his defense. And this is something that Jack Simone he says very specifically in his article that came out. He said, and I quote, "This is where the problem lies. Jackson's defense should pique the Celtics' interest, but actually bringing him on board would pose an issue as they don't really have the space for him. Barring an Anthony Simons trade, which seems unlikely this close to training camp, the Celtics have 14 players on their roster, and because of their financial problems, they probably won't add a 15th. That means if they wanted to bring Jackson on board, should the Bucks let him go, they would have to make some roster decisions of their own. So they may not have the most realistic options in terms of bringing him aboard, but the fit makes sense because Andre Jackson Jr. Of course, the defense is going to be an attractive asset for the Boston Celtics as a team that's really depended on their defensive production. Of course, having boasting guys like Drew Holiday and Derek White and Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum and Al Horford and Porzingis over the past couple of years, and even Robert Williams, Marcus Smart before that. The Celtics have really focused on their defense, and Ajax is really as versatile of a defender as you could get for the kind of player that he is, or at least the kind of status that he holds. Being a guy that's fighting for a spot on the end of the roster currently in Milwaukee, it's not very often that you see a player like him who again is competing with guys like Amir Coffey to get that last spot on the roster. For him to be a guy that could potentially go to Boston and play real minutes, especially in a year where Jason Tatum's not going to be in the picture, it makes a lot of sense, and especially considering his uptick in 3-point shooting this past year, another one of the core tenets of the Boston Celtics over the past year or two, especially. So Ajax would be a great fit in theory with the Boston Celtics, but it's all about how you get him there. And that's the part that's going to be difficult, not just for Boston, but for the Bucks as well, for both sides. It's going to be a little bit of a hurdle. And but if both teams came to the table with some kind of idea of how they could get the deal across, it really might not be as hard as some may think. Like, if both sides are motivated to get a deal done for their own reasons, their own motives, it really doesn't strike me as something that seems super duper impossible. Anyways, moving forward, because we've been talking about Ajax a lot in recent episodes, going to talk about a guy that hasn't really got much love from this channel, I guess specifically throughout this summer, and that's Mark Sears. And it seems like he's not getting much love from a lot of different guys or a lot of different media members and NBA writers and talking heads and people of that nature because Jack Traherne of Brew Hoop, he started to, I guess this is the first installment of his little series where we're getting going with training camp finally soon enough later this month. Yes, basketball is right around the corner. Believe it or not, we've almost made it. But Jack Traherne from Brew Hoop, you can go check out his stuff. He's starting a series where he's ranking every player on the Milwaukee Bucks, and I guess you know ranking them based on the impact that they may or may not have for the team, for the actual roster in 25-26. And to begin the series, Jack Traherne ranked Mark Sears as the number 20 player on the roster because this is including guys that are in the G League, like a Pete Nance, like a Jamari Bouye. So, of all those players, Mark Sears comes in at dead last. And he kind of did a good job of justifying this reasoning. And mostly this has to do with the fact that while there could have been a shot that he was given a good amount of responsibility going into this year in his rookie year, with Damian Lillard being gone, it kind of evaporated quickly after Cole Anthony was brought in because, of course, they are the same archetype of player, but Cole Anthony is, of course, more established and he's been more relied upon as a score first guy off the bench for a team lacking in offense like the Orlando Magic. So again, he's just more proven at this point, of course, because Mark Sears hasn't touched an NBA court yet. But in due time, I'm thinking he will get a shot. But after talking about Cole Anthony coming in and kind of giving, decreasing Mark Sears' chance to really make an impact on this roster, he really Jack Traherne, he really brought the point home that Mark Sears could eventually have something to do with the Bucks potential uh upward, rise in offensive production in the near future, maybe not this year but next year. And it's because of the certain role that Mark Sears would play and that he has played in college. And this is kind of a popular topic of conversation that both NBA, sort of scouting people and college scouting people have talked about. And that's when ball dominant, shorter, undersized guards at the college level, when they get their chance in the NBA, most of the time I feel like those kinds of guys don't really pan out, or at least they don't become star level players. Of course, there's guys like Jalen Brunson who you could really compare Mark Sears to in a lot of ways. But there's a guy like Jalen Brunson who is, of course, a very undersized guard, but he's become one of the best players in the NBA flat out. And not saying that Mark Sears necessarily has Jalen Brunson's potential, but it's just guys like him, undersized guards, that the one thing they can do is score. More often than not, those guys don't typically tend to make it, or at least have super functional roles on consistently good NBA teams. But Jack Traherne wanted to, kind of bring that point up in his article, and he said, finally, I want to address the undersized, high usage college players can't scale down their roles in the NBA argument. I think there's always value in being the guy, and talking about Mark Sears and, guys like Jalen Brunson getting that opportunity to be the guy, to be the leading scorer on a college team. And he goes on to say, players learn a lot by playing a role in which they are relied on heavily to create offense for their team. This experience is valuable because when these players reach the NBA, they should understand what the guy on the NBA team needs and be able to mold their game to fit that. And I feel like that's a very, very accurate assessment, because maybe Jalen Brunson wouldn't be the caliber of player that he is today if he didn't have that opportunity for Villanova to be one of their leading scorers and to really have a lot of that offensive burden placed upon him. He needed that kind of experience to understand, wow, this is really what's expected of me at that level. And when I get to the NBA, when I get to a team that's going to be expecting a lot out of me, I'll know how to contribute and in what ways I can. And I feel like Mark Sears is in that same kind of situation where he got that experience, which was very valuable to him. And I feel like going forward in the G League and potentially getting a few spot minutes for the actual NBA team in the near future, he will be not necessarily accustomed to providing instant offense for an NBA team, but at least he'll have the experience of, okay, if I am going to be the guy one day, or if I am going to be relied upon to provide instant offense off the bench for a competitive Milwaukee Bucks team, this is what I'm expected to do, and this is how I'm expected to do it. And at least he'll have had that experience beforehand. So those are very valuable things for a guy like Mark Sears to have previously had, or those kinds of experiences are very valuable to a guy like that. And I'm hoping for big things out of him in the G League, and maybe hopefully he can crack the roster at the NBA level. Hopefully that doesn't come by way of injury to a guy like KPJ or a guy like Cole Anthony, knock on wood. But hopefully he does get a chance to play spot minutes at the NBA level. And finally, we are going to round things out with another shout out to Dalton Sell of Fansided, who is a great author, and you should check that guy's stuff out. But he wanted to talk about Kyle Kuzma recently, and it's funny. It was kind of just in time for my previous episode where I really kind of laid into Kyle Kuzma and said that while the news around him being like, oh yeah, I don't know what we're gonna expect out of him next year. He's gonna be so unpredictable based on the terrible season that he just had this past year, and the terrible playoff run. I kind of really prodded into him and said, we just need more out of Kyle Kuzma flat out, and we shouldn't accept another awful year, and that even if he does have an awful year next year or the year after that, he might not have a place in the NBA in the very near future, because teams and front offices are growing less and less patient with their current talent by the day, because the NBA just keeps getting better by the day. The talent that's already in the NBA keeps developing at such a rapid pace, and there's guys now from all over the world that are coming in to take guys like Kyle Kuzma's spot. So he really needs to get it together this coming season. And he is really a huge wild card for the Bucks, because if he does return to the caliber of player that he was for the Lakers in 2020 when he helped them win a championship, that can really be the difference for a Milwaukee Bucks team being a top 4 seed or fighting for the play-in. I believe that he could have that much of an impact for the Milwaukee Bucks. But Dalton Sell, he pointed out that that Kyle Kuzma should really come into this next season with a lot of motivation, and that comes from a previous comment that he made after being traded to the Bucks, where this is he points this out that this was from a previous article from the Athletics. Eric Nem, Kyle Kuzma said when he arrived to Milwaukee, obviously I've been licking my chops for an opportunity to compete at a high level. So he said that prior to not prior to the trade, but prior to, I guess, suiting up for the first time as a Buck, and then he went on to have a playoff run where he averaged less than 6 points a game on horrid shooting. So that kind of, from the perspective of Dalton Sell, that has to kind of light a fire underneath Kyle Kuzma, knowing that he said that kind of thing, knowing that that's public information. That he said something like, "Oh yeah, I've been waiting for my chance to really contribute and make positive contributions to a championship contending team," and then going on to play a stinker, or have a stinker like that for the rest of the regular season and then into the playoffs. That's really got to light a fire under Kyle Kuzma, and it really could be the depending factor or the deciding factor of whether he comes out in 2025-26 on a heater, or if he just continues to devolve as a player, and whether the Bucks will begin to think, man, what are our immediate future plans for Kyle Kuzma? Are we going to try and ship him out for whatever package we could possibly bring in exchange? What could we possibly do with a guy like Kyle Kuzma? And that is if he continues to decline. But he's still young. He still obviously has a lot to prove. He still has a lot of natural gifts. So I'm really hoping he can turn it around. And I am, at the end of the day, I am very hopeful for him because we've seen what he can do for different franchises. And we just need him to kind of get that confidence back and get it back into his head that these are things that he's done before. He's contributed at that level where he was arguably a top 4 or 5 player on a championship team, which not a lot of guys in the NBA can say that they have been in that position before, but Kyle Kuzma is one of the select few. So hoping he can really turn things around and help Giannis and company contend for a potential run to possibly the conference finals this year. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. Once again, I've been your host, Dean Simon, and please remember to leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think about all these segments, and subscribe, turn on post notifications so you don't miss future episodes. And yeah, that'll be about it. I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.